Hello, good morning, everyone. This is the time at 8 in Cairo, and perhaps the 15 in Japan. So we would like to start today's lecture. So we today, at first, Mr. Muraji will explain the facilitation course. So please, Muraji-san.
Hi. Hello. I'm Takeo Muraji. I'm an architect and the chairman of JCAVE, Japan Commission for Appropriate Architecture and the Built Environment. Thank you for joining us today for Urban Community Development Facilitator Training course. I briefly explain this course. I'll share the screen. In community development with participation of residents, it is necessary to have a facilitator, a specialist who encourage the discussion among residents and find the direction for urban development from this discussion. JCAVE has been conducting training course for facilitator in Japan and has now decided to conduct the course in the historic Cairo as a part of the project to preserve and develop the historic Cairo. This course consists of 11 lectures. First and second, third lecture already done. But those who did not attend can watch the video. The URL provided through Zoom chat. Today, the third lecture, Reconstruction Community Planning by Dr. Ichiko, and fifth, characteristic of Islamic architecture in Cairo by Dr. Fukami-san, and sixth, area management by Mr. Shishido, and seventh, cultural heritage hardware and software by Dr. Okada, and eighth, architectural conservation and landscape by Dr. Karia, and ninth, traditional craft and town planning in Kawagoe by Mr. Alamaki, and the 10th, modernization through renovation by Mr. Isono, and the 11th, vernacular architecture and the role of the architect by Dr. Funo. In this program, parallelly doing residential workshop, transport planning, waste management, two workshop already done. The next workshop with disaster prevention, which strongly relate to today's lecture. Then historic building resource and intangible heritage, then building maintenance and the traditional craft and the tourism and settlement and the vacant houses and the vacant land use. Those who complete this course will receive a certificate issued by JCAVE upon attendance of at least 8 lecture feedback committee required, including first lecture. And also one experience to attend the residence workshop and you need to report about what you feel about the lecture and also workshop. Right-hand side, you can find this response paper. Please fill down about your response too. Today, already I explained the facilitation course, and then by Ichiko doing lecture 4, pre-reconstruction committee planning, and also Dr. Professor Ara-san also will present about the disaster. And we have a Q&A. Then I will explain the explanation of the next workshop after the Q&A, and then finally supplementary explanation by Fukami-san. So I will hand over to the Fukami-san. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Muraji-san. I'm sorry. So we will move to the lecture by Ichiko-sensei. Ichiko-sensei, please.
Okay. Thank you, Fukami and Muraji-san. So today it's very honor to me to make a brief presentation in this time. So actually, I've never visited to Egypt or Cairo, but I'm very much looking forward to my next visit to Cairo to have a face-to-face discussion with all of you and do some research in Cairo, historical heritages. So I'd like to introduce, today, I would like to introduce the Japanese experience from the viewpoint of coping with natural disasters, and the use of community workshops. So maybe my presentation possibly be a little out of the line with the purpose of this project in Baitia Camp. But firstly, to please accept my presentation, and after that, make a meaningful discussion to all of you. Thank you. So I'd like to share my presentation. Okay, today's my presentation theme is 2 points. One is what is a disaster? What is a disaster? And second one is community resilient workshops in Tokyo. Resilient means very useful and very important words to a natural disaster or disaster research. And this first slide or first picture is just workshops for the community resilient after the big disaster. Participants surrounding the mock-up and some communication with immediate shelter phases. So I'd like to introduce these workshops experiences and the effect of the community. So it's my little curriculum vitae. I am now in the professor of Tokyo Metropolitan University since 2017. And I gave in PhD in urban science. Urban science means urban planning, urban policy, or urban disaster management at Tokyo Metropolitan University in 2000. And secondly, my major outreach activities, actually I go to the on-site and some make a project with residencies or bureaucracies or local government. For example, the Planning Research Council of Urban Seismic Risk Reduction Plan by Tokyo Metropolitan Government. As you know, the Tokyo Metropolitan Government mentioned and control and management the policy of natural disaster countermeasures. And actually, I am also a chairman of the City Planning Board in Inagi City and Kogane City. Inagi City and Kogane City is also the far from central Tokyo. It's a suburb of Tokyo mega regions. And also, finally, I am also a representative of a board of directors in Disaster Collaboration Support Tokyo. This group means a volunteer group to prevent the disaster loss. And after the event, we gather to voluntarily and support devastated area. So, okay. Oh, sorry. And this is my research thesis or research agenda, me and my laboratory. One is a disaster research after the big event from the planning theory, urban planning theory. For example, I dedicating in Japanese domestic disaster like 1995 Hanshin-Awaji earthquake and 2011 Great East Japan earthquake, and others internationally, 1999 East Marmara earthquake in Turkey, and 2004 the coast of Sumatra, Indonesia, a big tsunami disaster, and 2015 a Golkar earthquake in Nepal. And second, my research thesis is community resilient or community resilient program or community resilient design in Tokyo metropolitan area. This means a vulnerability analysis, both building environment and society aspects, developing cope with capacity for the disaster, and analysis those research. I'd like to make pre-disaster planning for post-disaster recovery. And this under the photos, photo is an actual project in dedicating or outreach programs, workshops. So today's presentation outline, go to the main topics. My presentation outline 2 points. First is what is a disaster? How to conceptualize a disaster? Maybe in the city of Cairo, it's not far from natural disasters like an earthquake or volcano. So I'd like to some important 2 definitions about a disaster. One is the classification from a lead and frequency time. Lead and frequency. Lead means the time between the beginning of the event and the peak time. So the second definition is vulnerability model, means that risk equal hazard combination vulnerability. And this vulnerability model is succeeded in United Nations, UNDP, UNOCHA, and also IPCC. So it's vulnerability model or the concept of disaster by vulnerability model is very important to understand the disaster or global warming. And second, my presentation thesis is a case study report for resilient vicinity community. And 2 case study, 2 community I introduce for you. First is East Ikebukuro near Tokyo Central area. Second is Kinugaoka, Hachioji, hillside suburb area from central Tokyo. Okay, so continuing to what is a disaster, the definition of the disaster. Firstly, I give you the brief quiz questions. So this world map means the frequency of hazard. This white country is a very low intensity of hazard, and this green and this red country is very high density to the hazard. And my question is, this world map means what hazard this map means. So this is 3 answers: seismic hazard, volcano hazard, cyclone hazard. This is question 1. And secondly, this is question 2. Do you think what is a hazard? Seismic, earthquake, or volcano, or cyclones? And this one is third of the question. So third map means that Egypt also like some frequency to the hazard. So I'd like to answer from you, but unfortunately it's little time to thinking and lecture time. So I'd like to give you the answer. So first map is looking for this map. So China, United States, Canada, and the mainland Africa and Europe is not so happened. So Japan, Indonesia, Philippines, and Russia is a very high frequency. Its hazard means volcano, volcano earthquake, volcano hazard. And second hazard means looking for the United States or Mexico or some South America. So this hazard means a cyclone or typhoon or technological disaster. And third one is seismic or earthquake disaster. Earthquake disasters spread it all over the world. Okay, so I think that Japan is most popular and gathering most variety of hazard is gathering in Japan. But I think Egypt is also have a risk to the natural hazard, especially on the earthquake. And after my presentation, the discussion regarding the discussion, I heard that Mr. Ara-san presentation me or introduce about the risk of the seismic hazard in Cairo or Egypt. Okay, so and this is IPCC, the sixth assessment report. It's just announced about 2 months later. So this report presented the what degree is grow in the all over the world. And I'm prepared about the point of Cairo. And this map means mean temperature change 2.6 degrees C means that after about 5 years to the 2.6 degree is growing up. And this means days with above 35 Celsius and 35 Celsius degree days over the 43.4 days. Do you think it's a very toughness, it's very serious environment to the global warming? So I presented the natural disaster or natural hazard. It's also the citizen of Egyptian or citizen of Cairo. It's very now it's very serious, and I think that accept and considering and discussion to each other. Okay, so I'd like to the definition of disaster. Two definition. First is I plotted the kind of disasters like climate change, ground subsidences, or ground sinking, or environmental pollution, and catastrophic volcano eruption. Famine is maybe a very popular in the mainland Africa. So volcanic eruption and supernova explosion, floods or cyclone, and tsunami by earthquake, and astronomical conflicts. How to conceptualize those a lot of kinds of hazard. So this time I would like to the two axes. This is one is a vertical axis. Vertical means a lead time. Lead time means I already mentioned that lead time means between the the beginning of the hazard and come to the peak of the time. For example, in earthquake, if you experience the earthquake hazard, firstly is a very weak ground motion, and gradually growing, and a big ground shaking. So the beginning of the weak shaking and the peak of the big shake, the between the time is the lead time. And this horizontal axis is scale and frequency time. But this is very important is the frequency. Frequency means once the hazard has happened, the next time is how long time to did. So it means 1 year, 10 year, and very a long time frequency. So let's plot this horizontal and vertical axis to the all kind of hazard. All hazard can plot these two axes charts. And this is not my theory. This is not my idea. This is Japanese volcanic researchers, Masato Koyama in Shizuoka University. And I think Professor Koyama can success to definition the all kinds of hazard to one chart or one pictures. So I think it's a one important definition of a natural disaster. Especially lead time means a very important point of evacuation. As you know, if the lead time is very short, people cannot escape or run away to the hazard. But if the lead time is very long, people can prepare or evacuation to the hazard. And for example, environmental issues like global warming means a very long lead time, and we can prepare or we can mitigate or we can stop the growing the temperature. Okay, so I think that this definition by Professor Koyama is very meaningful. This very one of the meaningful definition. So the next definition is the vulnerability model, and vulnerability model succeeded in IPCC. So this picture means a climate resilient model, and this point is risk is a central point, and this composed of hazards, vulnerability, and exposure. So the United Nations IPCC researchers accept those vulnerability model. So what is a vulnerability, or what is the definition of vulnerability model? This means a report by the World Bank in 2014. It means this composed of exposure, hazard, and vulnerability. And those each component, the size of the component means the size of risk. And each exposure, hazard, vulnerability definition is that. Hazard means the likelihood, probability, or a chance of a potentially destructive phenomena. Exposure means the location, attributes, and values of assets that are important to communities. And vulnerability. Vulnerability means the likelihood the asset will be damaged exposed to a hazard event. So this is a general definition of vulnerability model, or risk equal hazard combination vulnerability. Okay. So, but today I introduce you about a theory or a theory from the disaster research. This is a theoretical book about at risk in the England researcher groups. So this researcher group defined the risk or disaster equal hazard combination vulnerability. And I think their model is very just important to the definition of vulnerability, not the definition of risk. So they define the vulnerability like that. The characteristics of a person or a group and their situation that influence their capacity to anticipate, cope with, resist, and recover from the impact of a natural hazard. So it's very interesting that it's not simply mean fragility or accessibility or weakness. I think that generally the vulnerability means just like similar to a fragility or susceptibility or weakness, but in the theory or academic definition is not just means a fragility or weakness. And it involves a combination of factors that determine the degree to which someone's life, livelihood, property, and other aspects are put at risk by a discrete and identifiable event in nature and in society. And next, we would like to focusing on this picture of cover. So, as you see the this picture, it's very popular and it's very famous ukiyo-e in Japanese Edo era design, Katsushika Hokusai. So at risk, English researcher group defines that this picture just means our definition. So I'd like to to explain this this picture. So firstly, what is a hazard? Hazard means very high waves, very high waves. And what is a vulnerability? Vulnerability, so means this picture, this is a small ship and riding on the fishermen about 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 5, 6, 7, or totally 9 person is riding on. And focusing on the relation about highway and small ships. This relationship means that vertically straight ahead to avoid going down. Vertically straight to attack to the high waves, it means can make us a damage to very small attitude to the hazard. So at risk group or definition of vulnerability means something like a style or something like activity or something like a culture to the natural event or natural hazard. So that I think that vulnerability or definition of vulnerability at disaster research is very meaningful in community development. Okay, so next, I'd like to the case study for resilient or vulnerability community in Tokyo experience. I explained the 2 case studies or 2 districts in today's presentation. Firstly is East Ikebukuro near Tokyo Central area, high wooden housing density that is fragile for ground shaking and fire. Fire means extending the naturally. And this Ikebukuro district disaster prevention project has been conducting since middle 1980s. And in 1918, resilient community workshops were worked out on expert. Expert means community leaders, residence leaders, and local government officials, and some practitioners. And a second case study, Kinugaoka Hachioji, hillside suburb area, large-scale residential development since 1970s. Those suburb, a big development means have a landslide risk due to the steep terrain. Middle-income families purchase and make a vicinity communities. In 2019, disaster life continuity workshops were worked on with our laboratory members. So I'd like to first case study of Ikebukuro. So this is earthquake risk assessment opened at 2012, just announced by Tokyo Metropolitan Government. And this map means this grade of the ground shaking containing a ground shaking and estimated damage by this ground shaking or by those estimated seismic scenario. And this means that like this is like Tokyo central area, and this east, and this is west, and you mean that you can see that in the north and east area very fragile or very vulnerable in Tokyo area, and this suburb west area is not so weak for seismic hazard. Okay, and sorry, earthquake risk in Tokyo means just the ground and strong ground shaking by collapse by the building, and also the fire. As you know, in Hanshin-Awaji earthquake in 1995, the great extended fire is make big damage to the city of Kobe. And this is a rehabilitation project for disaster prevention from 1981 by Tokyo Metropolitan Government. And today I'm focusing on the East Ikebukuro. East Ikebukuro means this one. So this red district or red community starting the disaster rehabilitation or a disaster mitigation project about 30 or about 40 years. So firstly, I introduced East Ikebukuro, and secondly, Kinugaoka. Okay. Firstly, the total workshop program and the result in East Ikebukuro. The workshop goals is verifying disaster prevention project over 30 years and developing life continuation and town recovery plans after the big disasters. Disasters means a big seismic event, earthquake. And participants, residents leader about 20 people, local government officials about 10 people, various practitioners about, practitioners means architect or urban planning or social planner or something like a nurse or something like that. It means that not just the architect or urban planning or some various practitioner or various supporters can get in these workshops. And helper student, it means that my laboratory can participate about 10 numbers. So this is a program and goal output. In the East Ikebukuro workshops, this is held by fourth time workshops. First is town walking and drawing a map. And secondly, imagine succession from evacuation to a long-term recovery. Imagine the scheme or imagine the scenes after the event to the recovery to restore each person's life. And third is designing temporary shelter. Temporary shelter means it's just not a permanent shelter, but it's not just a shelter. Temporary shelter means a very meaningful idea of disaster planning. And the fourth workshop focusing on the considering town recovery plan by photo collage. And the total workshop goal is two total goal outputs. One is drawing a verification map of project result about 30 years. And secondly, formulating or making or writing pre-disaster plan or post-disaster recovery, like this one. Okay. So firstly, this is a first workshop photos and go around the outside to checking the result of the disaster rehabilitation project. Okay, so joining the very young students. So this is a first workshop outlook. This is also outlook, and you can see that very old and vacant house is over there, over here. And this is as you can see, that very narrow road. I think that narrow road, not just but if the earthquake occur, this narrow road maybe cannot pass away because those buildings or those materials to go down to this narrow road. So the participants means that this narrow road may be maybe a risk for seismic event. So, but contrary to the weak point in first workshop, also checking out the result of the rehabilitation or mitigation project. This means widening roads, you can see the widening roads, and so that uploaded new residential architecture or new residential building is built up in about 30 years. Oh, sorry. And also, this is water for fire prevention. This person is a community leader. He introduced to us, this is a very meaningful asset for our community. So this is a neighborhood evacuation site. It's also developed by a community project. And after the rounding by small groups, we come up with and make some maps. And I think so. This map means make patch to the photos, and green point means safety, and red point means danger. For example, it means a narrow roads, okay, and this means a widening road, and this means green safety means a new very strong building for seismic event. And in the first workshops, participants supported by facilitator, members drawing or making the result of their surveys. And I think pointed out that the result of the first workshop also served as the confirmation of the result of the community projects over the past 30 years. It was an opportunity to review the community plan and reflect on the community's effort to date. So means the past 3 years plan is like that. This is a map. This is a community development plan in 1986, about 35 years ago, and this means making widening road and making some small and wide size parks, and also making some residential design or residential density design. So, for example, this is the concept for the housing project. Housing construction policy means construction for low-rise residential buildings based on the three-story structure. So this is about 35 years ago, and in 2018 workshops, participants can certify the what project or our town is reinforced for the earthquake disaster. Okay. So, okay, this is a result of the rehabilitation or community development project, means like a widening road by the 1986 plan, and uploaded residential architect like new buildings. And this is also updated residential architectures, but it's just a change in the original plan. It means a very high-rise new buildings also produced in this district. So, but to near the high-rise buildings, around the footprint of the high-rise building, green space was installed and maintained, and some pocket park was provided by the developer. So today I will focus on the following point from this East Ikebukuro workshops. One is how developed parks and open spaces can be an effective resource in times of disaster, that in the restoration phase, in addition to the immediate response phase. Second, how are these parks and open space utilized under normal circumstances? The system is effective in times of disaster if it can be utilized under normal daily life. Okay, I mean that this is an open space by the plan and actually certified after the actually certified by project. And this is a sample of a developed small park, square maintained green by residential volunteers. Okay, and this is paved street and updated store and some small pocket park. Okay, and this is some event is occurred in developed small park. It means mochitsuki in Japanese culture or Japanese community activities to make rice cake pudding. This means a mochitsuki festival held every year in community play park. It's also developed by the community development. So this is the other picture of the mochitsuki event. In addition to the elderly, like this one, like this elderly men, children, and their parents who have moved into new housing also participate, So that means I will focusing on the how developed parks and open space can be an effective resource in times of disaster. Okay, and 2018 workshops certify and some imagine the utilize the small open space or developed parks and small open spaces, not only the immediate response after disaster, but also a long-term recovery assets. Okay, so I would like to our next case study, community resilient workshops. The next case study is Kinugaoka district. This workshop goal is coming up with adaptation scenario or landslide risk and natural disasters. In East Ikebukuro, the hazard scenario means very strong ground shaking and extent fire. But in the Kinugaoka city, it's the disaster scenario focusing on a landslide. And also participant is similar in East Kinugaoka, East Ikebukuro, a residential leader and general neighbors about 30 people, local government officials about 10 people, various practitioners and helper students. And this is a program, and this is just 3 times. First is walking around the town and thinking about the post-disaster issues. Walking around is the same in the East Ikebukuro workshop programs. And second is imagine life recovery after a disaster. And third is enriching the issues for life continuation and town recovery. And goal outputs, 2 points, drawing a participation map or project result about 30 years, formulating pre-disaster plan for post-disaster recovery. And disaster prevention issues faced in Kinugaoka, it's not different in the East Ikebukuro near the central Tokyo. I also mentioned because it's a landslide risk. However, the slope provides a good vantage point and a pleasant breeze. A very comfortable breeze or a comfortable temperature can make this slope. And steep slopes and cliffs are both danger and resources. It's not hazard, it's not danger, but also it's an asset or it's resources for the residences or for the communities. And the second agenda or second problem community is population aging. Heads of household who who purchased their homes around the 1980s and moved in all at once are now 75 years of age or elderly couple households are increasing. So firstly, the landslide risk. This map means surrounding the Kinugaoka district. Actually, the Kinugaoka district, like this small district, but also those areas containing a landslide risk. So means orange zone in the red zone is a landslide. Orange zone and red zone contains landslide risks. So residencies or community members or community leaders have to cope with these landslide risks. And this is a view of outlook of Kinugaoka. A very peaceful, very comfortable very comfortable breeze can get. Okay, so and this is also out of Kinugaoka, and this is a cliff or a steep slope in this district. It's a very it's just green and something like a resource for the community, but also it's a risk or hazard in this community by landslide. So this is some outlook of Kinugaoka, and this is playing park space for safety contamination. I mean that in daily life, this is a children's playing park, but after the disaster or something natural disaster happened, this play park or this open space make a space for safety confirmation. Okay, so in the first workshops, community leaders or practitioners or local officials can make us small groups and checking a steep cliff or steep slope in first workshops. And this is the result of first workshops created map in first workshops. It also means risk for the steep slope, but also it means aspect of asset or aspect of the aspect of good point for the community. So I think it's very important point that landslide risk or landslide risk for the steep slope means two aspects. One is a risk and one is asset or resource for the community. It's very important point or discussion point for this community. Okay, and this is a second problem in second phased problem in Kinugaoka community, aging. Population composition by gender, aged group 5 in Kinugaoka. It means that gradually aging people are very aging. Population group from the 1930s to 1950s, aged now in 65 to 85 as of 2015, constitutes the main resident groups. The community population aging is progressing. And community aging means those problems like this. So this is a Kinugaoka district, and this is a public school. Public school means a designated shelter or public shelter, but aging people can go to this public shelter because of it's a very steep slope, and it's just difficult to walking to this public shelter. So aging problem is also for the disaster risk. So, but in these workshops, participant discussion about the risk or asset in the community. So the participants say that if okay, we maybe go to the public shelter to under our district, but in our community have community salon activities. Community salon. So so maybe some disaster occurred. Aged people can stay in this community salon or neighborhood housings. So we can open or we can accept those aged people in community. So those conversation is held up in 2019 workshops. And I think this is a vulnerability workshop, a resilient community workshops, or making some resilient community idea in workshop style. So conclusion. My presentation is firstly what is a disaster, and secondly the case study for resilient vicinity communities. Two case studies. First is East Ikebukuro, and East Ikebukuro conclusion is participants share that developed facilities can be effective resource in times of disaster, that in the restoration phase, in addition to the immediate response phase. And if it is used on a daily basis, can it be utilized in times of disaster? To use daily leave is very important to the disaster mitigation or disaster reduction. So secondly, the Kinuoka Hachioji, the conclusion is that daily social activities such as community salon activities are linked to disaster preparedness and lead to mutual aid in times of disaster. So the community salon activities means like this. Daily tea parties held by the community members. Okay, so thank you. My presentation finished. Okay, so please go to the discussion to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ichiko-sensei. And we are moving to the question and answer. Before that, perhaps it's better to share the Ara-san's. Please explain from Ara-san. I will share the screen.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Professor Naoko. Thank you very much, Professor Ishiko, for your presentation. In fact, it's enriching all of our discussion. And as you mentioned, even though Egypt, and particularly Cairo, is not of a high vulnerable environment for risks. However, as you mentioned, there are, of course, potential for, or actually very apparent potential for very upcoming disasters, especially if we are not prepared for that. Well, while you were presenting, Professor Ishiko, I actually added other notes onto the list of the ones I have sent earlier. So, and the purpose of those notes is basically to incite the discussion of the theme with the local participants. So basically to make sure that the ideology and the concepts that our Japanese fellows are sharing would be easily grasped and digested, and also and put in context basically for the local community. And that's why I am keen to reflect a bit on the topic before the community workshop starts. So in order to make the link, I'm not going to go through all the list because I will do that in the workshop in a few days' time. But actually, in order to make the link between what Professor Ishiko just introduced and the points I have written earlier, is the usual contradiction, or the usual, I would say, the usual, yes, it's a contradiction between how to preserve the historic architecture and urban fabric, but also how to make this urban fabric risk resilient, and the community also integrating with that. So you have, for example, introduced the idea of widening streets. So to lessen a bit the risks of earthquakes in case of when you have very tiny little alleys. That's always something that is relied on when the state wants to open and widen the streets in historic Cairo, mentioning that widening the street will lessen the risks and the exposure of the old city towards risks. Also to make an easy mobility and accessibility for fire department and police vehicles. But on the other side, we need to preserve the historic fabric because this is one of the assets and also the attributes of the historic, of the World Heritage Site from one side, but also of our identity from the other side. So that's one notion. And usually that kind of debate and contradiction is the reason for the demolition of many, many historic buildings, unfortunately, without really putting together a logic risk preparedness map, as you mentioned, as in the case and the two cases you mentioned. We are very much looking forward, for example, in our vision to introduce pocket gardens, as you have explained. But those pocket gardens we have introduced in order to house social activities and community activities that are very much needed. Now, after listening to your presentation, those pocket gardens have a dual purpose, which is not only to introduce those sort of activities needed into the historic fabric, but also to make the historic fabric quite risk resilient. And on that subject, I actually written all of my points. So, for example, the imminent for collapse building number 2. As Professor Naoko knows and others maybe know as well, the building I am in right now, which is Beit Yakan, was registered after the 1992 earthquake. And once registered as imminent for collapse, one cannot really issue any permit for conservation or for restoration or rehabilitation. If you are an owner of a building under the category of imminent for collapse, you will have to demolish it all the way to the ground and rebuild it if you want to develop the property. That's a very unfortunate legislation that we are in fact faced with, because usually all of these imminent for collapse reports written for all the buildings in historic town was done in an office right after the earthquake, without even checking the values of the buildings, which I believe the values should always overstate and overshadow the conditions. So we deal first with value, then we can consider conditions. So that's one issue that I would like to discuss with our community, with all the imminent for collapse buildings registered in the town. And unfortunately, we don't have, except very little maneuvering for those buildings to be preserved, such as what I've done in Beit Yakan. It took me quite a while to face that report from a logistical and legal point of view. There is also priorities, as you mentioned. For example, number priorities for risk mitigation. And you have mentioned that you need to design series of open spaces into the historic fabric in order to have like shelters or escape area for during risks, during disasters. And that's very much appreciated. But can you share with us details of the criteria of such open spaces? how are they separated? What's the size in relation to the community? What's the shape? How distant should they be from each other? Those parameters will be very important, of course, to consider when we talk about our priorities, when we will discuss with the community. I will stop here. You can read all the rest, and if you have questions, I'm very much looking forward to discuss those matters in further details. Thank you, Professor Ishiko.
Thank you so much, Professor Ara. And Professor Ichiko, do you have any the answer for him?
Okay, very thanks to the very important and meaning comment from the view of the Historic Cairo. And each point is very important, and I'm very interested all of point, and maybe this point is next residence. This point also share and considering about the next residential workshops. So workshops, and in this year's our facilitator program, preserving historic town, or Professor Mr. Kariya-san, maybe presentation about disaster mitigation or disaster prevention activity planning for the historic town. It means also like the how to preserve and reinforce to the disaster. It's making some both sides to empower in the community. And I'd like to adding to my experiences. Okay, so okay, sorry. So this is our district plan in East Ikebukuro, and actually the plan containing a widening road, but widening of the very selectable, and also most area is preserved in the original block networks or narrow road networks. It's just select committee members and the committee leaders. So I think that important to select widening roads, safety roads to the committee, but other roads preserve, or other district or other committee architecture is preserved to the community development. I think that the disaster prevention management or disaster community development plan is also select or share or considering or a conversation with residents and local government officials and practitioners to how to preserve and how to reinforce the earthquake or other natural disasters. And I think this is I think my experience to the important to making a district plan for the to cope with natural hazards. Okay, thank you so much. But each point is very meaningful and very impressive for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Ichiko-san. And Ara-san, do you add something? No?
Just a quick note that also Cairo is very well known with series of frequent disasters. You know, the latest would be the 1992 major earthquake. But then throughout the history, the city has experienced many historic earthquakes, of which the well-known 1300 earthquake, during which many of the minarets of our mosques have been, in fact, collapsed. So and those are in fact registered in the chronicles and the historic books on historic Cairo. So this is something we need to talk about with the community as well. Maybe also the aftermath of the disasters might have some evidences here and there in the historic fabric, and sometimes they are regarded as being heartbreaking through the community. So I know that Japan has done a lot of effort in surpassing that kind of hardship feeling towards disasters, and perhaps especially the man-made disasters, and basically how to in fact use those very sad memories in very positive manner. That's what I felt, that it's very courageous with the Japanese culture nowadays, looking in 1940s, for example, events in the World War II. Thank you.
Thank you. May I say something? And perhaps when I heard the Professor Ichiko's the presentation, perhaps the example of Higashi Ikebukuro likes Mass Bureau and the Maglul Ayun in Cairo. When the Mass Bureau and the Maglul Ayun developed, they demolished all. But in Japan, to hear the community's the opinion, perhaps the already established area, inhabited area, has some grade. The Higashi Ikebukuro equal to the Mass Bureau and the Maglul Ayun, the historical the position. And also the Kinugaoka example is perhaps after 50 years, the new Cairo will be like this one. This is my opinion. And in Professor Ichiko's presentation, which is very important, preparing the disaster became the daily life, something that not only the time of disaster, perhaps think about the disaster continuing the daily life from the point of public or to hearing the community's opinion. This is my impression. Sorry. So do you have someone has any question and comments? Please, Regda-san, please.
Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
First of all, I want to thank Professor Taro for this lecture. We really enjoyed it today. Yes?
Baba.
Mean Baba.
Okay. Actually, it's my first time to attend a lecture talking about people and how people feel and how can we protect people from hazard or something related to disaster or something like this. Every time I attend any lecture, they are talking about heritage places or the urban fabric for the city. Really, I like the housing idea. For me, it's not very new idea for me here in Egypt, because we have in 18 or 17 people in the old days were gathering together to talk about political things, or sometimes they talk about music and art, but not for talking about the disaster we are facing or how we can help or solve these problems around us. So it's the first time we talk about something like this here in Egypt. It's for me, maybe I didn't listen for something like this before, but it's new for me. What if we don't have a garden to gather them, or some place to gather the people around this place. I think when I just thinking about which garden we can gather the people in time of crisis or something like this, the nearest place is I think Citadel Square. So I don't know if it will be a great choice or not. Also, something else I want to ask to Dr. Ala, or a comment. It's just a comment, not a question. We are talking about risk management here in Egypt. What if we don't have a great risk management because we don't have any plan, or we don't manage any plan before? Whatever we manage any plan, it's all around one institution, not many institutions. We don't have a lot of stockholders here. Whatever we have as stockholders, no one respect the decision of other people or other institution. So the decision maker here is related to one institution for one situation. So we don't have any answer after all. Whatever we try to solve some problems here, if it's around a building or around an area restoration or reconstruct any place or something related to heritage here. So what do you think about this? I think I asked 2 questions.
Kami-san.
Hi.
Can I answer?
Please.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for very meaningful and very expressive opinion from the Cairo historic area, and I agree that the total system or total just a management policy is needed in a country, and total just a management system also, I think that to begin with or make some leadership by a central government or local government, I agree. And also, but a citizen level or a workshop level can make some point to get started. For example, I feel that to the research about the experience in Mr. Arasan said that 1992 earthquake experiences or 1992 activities or some conversation for people to make their community to safer for the next time. I think that in community level or citizen level, I agree. I recommend and I see that good point is begin to the writing some materials or some make some records about the experience, the earthquake or something historical hazard or disaster record. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Can I?
Please.
Sorry.
Please.
Okay, can I say something else? I think for the community, they already know about hazard, but they don't know the terminology. I don't think here in Egypt we talk about what that mean or what that will be the definition for this word. We just know what the problem is, but we don't know how to express ourselves. I really have an experience with the community in Souk Salah, they already know about what happened in around the earthquake and what they have or the effect around this situation. They told me a lot about the building which affected from the earthquake, and also they talk about let me say something in that. Sometimes they talk about the heritage places which affected in the earthquake, and no one just solved the problem there. So they are the first people who face the problem there, because no one look to them or listen to them or talk to them about something like this. They just problem themselves.
Thank you, Ragda-san. So we can understand the situation of the residents in Sukisraha. And do you have, someone has any question? So we will move to the Muraji-san's presentation, please.
Yes, I will explain about the next workshop, how we can manage and how we can explain which there are it including the answer of the Ragda-san also.
Yes, Ragda-san.
Okay.
Okay.
見えますか? Can you look at the image?
見えています。
Yes,
見えて、はい。Next workshop will be held 20th August women 3 o'clock and 21st October men from 5 o'clock at the Bait Yakan. And please come Ragda-san too. And the facilitator come before 30 minutes, therefore 2:30 and also 4:30. The program is initially 20 minutes explaining about the disaster prevention and presented by general facilitator. And also we do the town walking. Each group will be accompanied by the 3 group facilitator, and each residence group work and find dangerous place and recovery resources. And then we back to the Bait Yakan, and we do the group discussion 40 minutes, including creating a map of current situation, then create the idea sheet for disaster prevention. And then we will do the presentation 10 minutes, and then we summarize finally. And this is the a detail of the program of the workshop. The workshop, the purpose is that this workshop will be held in the historic Cairo, Sukisraha, on the theme of the disaster prevention. Cities are subject to various disasters such as earthquake, fire, flood, etc. And it is necessary to be prepared for them. Pre-recovery community planning is an activity to stipulate what would happen in the event of disaster and how to reconstruction the city before disaster occur. And this is the program, as I mentioned, initially explanation 30 minutes, review the previous workshop 10 minutes because somebody cannot attend the previous workshop. Therefore, just review is required. And using record sheet. Maybe Ara-san will please explain what we done. And then I will explain the purpose of the workshop, including the image. And then town walk of 40 minutes, walk around the town, inspecting which area would be in danger and event of earthquake, fire and flood, and which area would be useful as recovery resources. Each block will be accompanied with the 3 group facilitator. So we need to check each role of the facilitator. One group facilitator guiding the group on the town work. Group facilitator B, time management. Group facilitator C, taking a photo and various support. Role of each residence group. Also, group of residents needed to have a role. Group leader and group sub-leader and a pointer, recorder and camera operator. And observer, maybe we have many facilitator. Therefore, some of them will be observer facilitator. Freely work and hearing and residents about the disaster. Hearing probably what kind of disaster do you imagine in the town, and what is the dangerous place when the disaster happen, and what will be recovery resources. And then we back to the Baitu account, and we have a discussion 40 minutes. One is about the creating a map current situation, and prepare large white map, draw the route, you worked on it. Example, in case of earthquake, signboard, air conditioner are likely to fall down. In case of fire, a fire is likely to spread. In case of flood, the area will be flooded and the people will be trapped. Where it would be useful in the event of disaster, for example, plaza, like open space where injured people can be treated. Roof and shade where disaster supplies can be distributed. A place where people who have lost their homes can sleep, etc. After listening to the residents' opinion, facilitator B and C fill in the post-it card, sticky paper, and paste them on the sticky paper to create a map to current situation. Then we discuss about the solution, about using 20 minutes, divide into hardware and software, and think of idea. Discuss what should be done for disaster prevention, and divide the idea into hard and soft parts, and write them on the sticky paper and paste them. Then we do the group presentation using 10 minutes. Each group of 2 people will make a presentation using the 2 sheets. Group facilitator A will select 2 appropriate presenters during group discussion. Then summary, 5 minutes. Summary of today's workshop, result and comment by overall facilitator, including Ara-san and Fukami-san, and also Kariya-san too. And fill out the question from 5 minutes. Therefore, we make this kind of paper. This is a research paper, and this is a solution paper. In the readiness workshop, I will show the image. So natural disaster, earthquake, fire, tsunami, flood disaster, and then collapse the block wall, and also ground floor and breaking, car parking. It's maybe dangerous place, falling signboard, dangerous place, and also triage open space, recovery resources, and emergency light feeding, then face location, temporary tent. It means recovery resources, and refugee shelter, gymnasium, recovery resources, and distribution of release and supplies, water supply shelter means recovery resources, and temporary housing. And it mention about how we can experience about the reconstruction from the disaster. So Taro-san, Ichiko-san mentioned about the program, about the workshop. Therefore, residents will do this floor. Initially, facilitator explains the whole program, and we walk around using 14 minutes and find the dangerous place and also the recovery resources. For example, this is the recovery resources. This is the dangerous place or not. And this is the maybe, although wooden house, maybe collapse. So maybe it means dangerous place. And concrete block wall sometimes break down. So dangerous place, open space, recovery resources, something like that. Then we back to the room and we discuss about the dangerous place and the recovery resources using a map, where we walked, and also put the red point. Red point means dangerous place, and put the green point, which means recovery resources. And then we think about the solution and present the sharing and summarized by the overall facilitator. And therefore, residents also have a role, division of role in each group: leader, sub-leader, and the pointer, the camera, and also record keeper. This is the pointer. It's very useful. I will bring this pointer. Pointer show this is dangerous place. This is recovery resources. So I a little bit quickly explain about the program of the next residence workshop. Therefore, please come 30 minutes before the facilitator, and then I will explain more detail, and also we find out each facilitator's role. We need to understand my role is this, my role is this. Otherwise, workshop doesn't work. Therefore, please come. That's all.
Thank you so much, Muraji-san. So today, almost 9:30 in Cairo. So we will close this lecture. Before closing the lecture, I want to say something. Please fill these enquete online. The URL already send it to you. And this is today's enquete, and also the third lecture has the enquete also. If you join the third lecture, please fill the enquete. And also I learned so many things, but we have to think about the historic city of Cairo, because as I said, perhaps the urban area has some criteria, and each criteria we can do something. But today, Professor Ichiko shows the not so the likely for the historic Cairo. So we have to think about how we can do in historic Cairo for risk management. And risk management is not only the disaster time, perhaps it continues the daily life. So when we think about the historic Cairo, perhaps dead end street is a very dangerous usual thinking. But we can reuse how to manage the dead end also. Perhaps dead end street will be not the disaster place. If we think about the recover or revise the dead end line end street, like that one, I feel it. Thank you so much for joining. So we will close the fourth lecture. Thank you, Ichiko-sensei.